Hello, Assalamu alaikum everybody. Hope you're all safe, sound and healthy. And we need to talk once again. And this time we need to talk about the Bara Wafat, or what is now Eid al-Miladun Nabi, and how it is political engineering and how it is a replacement of pagan festivities, just as the birth of Christ, the non-existent date, of 25th December, was a merger of pagan festivities. We need to talk about this because it is becoming utterly ridiculous at this point, where people actually literally do not even know what they're celebrating and what the 12th of Rabiul Awwal really stands for. I am so happy that, despite all our grievances with so many other things with Saudi Arabia, but the fact that they try to stick to the basics when it comes to following Islamic practices, especially guarding themselves against innovations, which is bid'at. I am so glad that Saudi Arabia still has not ticked this date on their calendar, because this date does not exist in the Islamic calendar. It has no place, okay? Problem is, as I've always said, that people have this thing where nothing is ever enough for them. If there are too many if there's a lot of extremism in religion, that too is too much for them. And if the religion is made very simple, that too is too little for them. They just have to do something. Human beings are not satisfied until they finger everything. Panga jitni der tak nahi liya na, utni der tak saans nahi aaya. Okay, you just can't breathe. The problem with you human beings is you can't breathe until you've fingered something. And why not finger religion while we're at it, right? Because that's what we're best at, as it is. Okay? Now, first of all, let's try to understand how birthdays began in monotheistic religions after never having indulged in them. Okay? And we will begin precisely with the celebration of Jesus' birthday on December the 25th, just to have a pretty darn good idea, okay, of what we're trying to talk about here. Now, as we know, the celebration of Jesus' birthday on December 25th emerged in the Roman Empire during the 4th century, coinciding with the pagan winter solstice festivals like there was, I think, Sol Invictus, and there was Saturnalia, right? And as we know, these were again pagan festivities based on pagan deities. Now, the Bible does not state the exact date or month of Jesus' birth, right? In fact, guess what? The Torah does not tell you of Moses' birth or even his death. Hazrat Suleiman, which is Solomon, Hazrat Dawood, which is David, Hazrat Ibrahim, Abraham. Can any one of you tell me what their date of birth is or what their date of passing is? No. And this is deliberate, okay? Prophets' dates of births and deaths are deliberately obscured from the record, okay, for a good reason. Is to avoid this exact charade that we indulge ourselves in, and then through this we go towards regression, towards paganism, okay? Let's just be honest here. The Bible, as I said, did not even give the date of Jesus. So early Christians focused more on his resurrection rather than his birth. So even today, in case you didn't know that, the practicing Christians, and by practicing Christians we mean Christians who actually declare themselves Christians, they do not celebrate Christmas, by the way. Just as they don't drink wine and they don't eat pork, by the way. But okay, let's move on. Let's try to understand about the pagan festivals and how they, merged. Although again, I've talked about this like a long time ago, but let's just reiterate a few things and stick to basic points here. The Romans celebrated Saturnalia, which was a holiday of feasting and gift-giving. And later, you had the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, which is the birthday of the unconquered sun. Imagine, around the winter solstice on December 25th. Now, as Christianity grew and became legalized under Emperor Constantine, church leaders in Rome sought a way to unite the populace and redirect existing midwinter celebrations. So this was served as a strategic replacement. So by designing December 25th as by designating December 25th as the feast of the Nativity, which was first recorded in official Roman calendars in 336 AD, by the way, the church provided a Christian meaning. It's like, again, it's a replacement, a Christian replacement, if you have it, of the solstice. So Jesus became the Son of Righteousness and Light of the world, to conquer or absorb popular pagan customs. So some historical evidence in writings from early theologians, such as Hippolytus, I think it was around 204 AD, suggest an alternative origin. Of course they would. So early Christians calculated that Jesus was conceived on March 25th. Now this was a very popular consensus, I remember, the date they believed he was crucified. So you see something very, very familiar here going on. We'll come to that familiar part, and you'll see how strikingly familiar it is. So there was this consensus where they're like, he was conceived on March 25th, which was the day also that they believed he was crucified. So adding 9 months of gestation to March 25th naturally results in December 25th. So basically the Christians thought that the resurrection, and even if he actually did die that day, they felt that celebrating or commemorating somebody, he's passing away, was so much more accurate than his birthday, because that just it celebrated the view that he had gone back to the real world where we all came from and where we all have to go back to. You understand? So yeah, so you will now notice a very similar theme here, which, as I said, that for centuries, both early Jews and early Christians, they largely avoided birthday celebrations, and by the way, so did Muslims, viewing them as a pagan custom. And as we know, it's a pretty recent thing, celebrating of birthdays and, anniversaries and stuff. Because the pagan association was, as we have covered so many times, but I'm going to sort of brief it down here. In the ancient world, birthdays were celebrated heavily by Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians. They tied the day of birth to astrology, horoscopes, and protective spirits, all of which, as we know, are superstitions and forms of polytheism, and they contradict monotheistic concepts and beliefs. And so they set up the biblical precedent, which if you look at the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, the only birthday celebrations mentioned are those of pagan or secular rulers like Pharaoh or, King Herod. And these events are often depicted negatively, associated with pride or execution. Also, do realize and understand that these were rulers who claimed to be gods. Especially if you remember Pharaoh, the whole point was he wanted people to worship him. He claimed that he was God, and so his birthday was celebrated. You understand? Now, if you look at the modern adoption, it was not until the late Middle Ages and the Reformation that ordinary citizens in Christian Europe began regularly celebrating their own birthdays. It was a shift heavily influenced by changing cultural views on children, family, and timekeeping. Now, how the Muslim rulers suddenly decided to join the club. The earliest documented organized celebrations of the Prophet's birthday began in Egypt during the 11th and 12th centuries under the Fatimid dynasty, which, by the way, is an Ismaili Shia caliphate. They, these were not major public street festivals, okay? They were highly structured, formal state affairs confined to the royal court, religious scholars, and officials. They included reciting sermons, distributing sweets, especially honey, and giving alms to the poor, which actually, no wonder it kind of, was accepted, because they were not making a festivity out of it. They were commemorating him properly, as in they were commemorating the Prophet by remembering him, by trying to implement his teachings, by trying to give charity, by distributing sweets. Okay? Now, the first king to create a public festival out of it was Sultan Muzaffaruddin Gokburi. Now, the problem with him that I have is because he universally credited, he began by making it a public festival, but the thing is that Sultan Muzaffaruddin, also known as Abu Sayyid al-Muzaffar, can be credited as the ruler who universally turned 12th Rabiul Awwal into a massive, joyful public holiday that we recognize today. He was the Sunni king of Erbil, which is modern-day Iraq. And my biggest problem with him is exactly this, that he literally turned this into a joyous occasion, because he suddenly decided that, since there is a percentage of doubt that the birth date of the Prophet and his passing date are both the same, so why not just celebrate it as his birthday? He was the brother-in-law and a top general, by the way, of a famous Muslim leader, Saladin. And in 1207 AD, which is the 7th century AH, he decided to host a grand carnival-style celebration for the entire population. And famous historians like Ibn Kasir and Ibn Khalikan documented his events, where there was lavish, funding, a lot of money, being wasted, basically, in the way I look at it, and turning it into this whole festivity sort of a thing. Now, the problem is, if you look at it carefully, as I said, that both historically as well as in modern times, one of the biggest debates argued by the Muslim scholars, is that the 12th of Rabiul Awwal goes against Orthodox Islamic beliefs for two primary reasons. The uncertainty of the date and the concept of bid'at, which is religious innovation. Like how the Christians decided on their own that Jesus shared the same date for his, birth and his death. In their case, they were like, his resurrection is like him, that is his birthday. His death day is his birthday because he was resurrected. But the Muslims, they seem to have created a very, very, very similar consensus, as you can see, which I find very oddly coincidental. Although, again, we'll come a little more to that, because the thing is that, as with Jesus, as I said, as with Moses, as with Solomon, as with David, as with Ibrahim, the exact calendar date and none of these prophets is it's not recorded, okay? None of these prophets have an exact calendar date recorded of their birthday, and not even of their death, to be honest, except for maybe the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because he was the last, so yeah, but at least during their lifetime, they were not recorded. The Prophet, peace be upon him, never celebrated his birthday. His companions never celebrated his birthday or their own birthdays. You see, it was never there. Even amongst the Christians, as I said, birthdays were not something that they did. Neither did the Jews, by the way. So while the 12th of Rabiul Awwal is the most widely accepted date in Sunni tradition, classical Islamic historians and biographers like Ibn Ishaq noted multiple possibilities, including the 2nd, the 8th, the 10th, or the 17th of the same month, Rabiul Awwal. So now the irony of the 12th here is compounding this issue. Early historical records uniformly agree that the 12th of Rabiul Awwal is the exact date that the Prophet passed away. And that is what really gets to me. Because, as I said, you do not know if it was his birthday or not, but you know that it is his date of passing. Why are you celebrating it? Sorry. Because, as I said, the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself never celebrated his birthday, right? His companions, his immediate companions, the Sahaba, they never celebrated, nor did the next two generations of Muslims, the Tabi'un and the Atba'il Tabi'un. They never celebrated his birthday either. It's a very new concept, if you like to put it this way, because Islamic law explicitly defines only two official religious festivals, which the Prophet himself said it. He said there are only two Eids, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. And critics argue that adding a third Eid alters the complete and perfected religion left by the Prophet, and I agree with them. Because, as I said, when the Prophet made it very clear, and there's no debate here, that there are only two Eids, this is not a secular celebration, you see. In Islam, anything that is secular, you can get away with. That's fine. But something that is religious, you cannot do something. You cannot add or remove. You cannot add to your religion. You cannot remove from your religion. It's as simple as that. It's a black and white rule, So we have scholars like Imam al-Suyuti, who later argued that if an action brings people together to feed the poor, recite the Quran, praise the Prophet, it is, a hasana. It's a bid'at al-hasana, which is a praiseworthy innovation because it leads to good deeds. But my argument here is no. Because first of all, turning it into a joyous public festival or a carnival or a celebration where people have now decided that they can go and start ringing doorbells and begging for money in the name of charity, that Eid al-Milad al-Nabi's money, people have lost the concept first of all already as to what it was supposed to be. Number two, you have people doing fireworks. Like, why even? Well, thankfully they've stopped. They're no longer doing fireworks. But then you have people lighting up their mosques and lighting up the roads and lighting up buildings, and people even lighting up their houses. Tell me, where is the alms and the charity and getting together to feed the poor and reciting the Quran and where is it? You're supposed to be praying maybe excessively or reading the Quran or maybe reading some hadiths and try to get your act together. Maybe that would be a much better way to celebrate this day if you do want to. Although, as I said there, I don't see why you're celebrating the day that your Prophet died. Seriously, no idea here. So it's because of this division, that the Muslim world kind of split into two perspectives that remain today, which we can see. But as I said, kudos to Saudi Arabia, who still has not recognized it as an official state or national holiday in the kingdom, even though they have their own secular national day, which is like, sort of like their Saudi day or whatever, similar to Independence Day. But they have not dared to incorporate this into their calendar. And I thank them, really. Because there is the no innovation rule that they're following. The official state clergy maintains that because neither the Prophet, peace be upon him, nor his companions celebrated birthdays, introducing the festival is a religious innovation, aka bid'at, that must be actively discouraged. And they actually took steps to ensure that people did not enter into this. So, the historical terminology and style of observance in the subcontinent, they've changed dramatically because This is also something that I was pointing out. This is something my own parents have been pointing out. As I said, it was known as Bara Wafat. And the shift from a somber observance known as Bara Wafat, focusing on the Prophet's death date, to the highly festive carnival-like celebration known as Eid al-Milad al-Nabi, or Nabi, focusing on his birthday. This took place gradually over the last century due to socio-political and sectarian dynamics, which is something I have been, trying to explain to people. And I don't get it, I really don't get it. That why is it that people cannot see something that is just a few decades old? It's literally, I know people are so intent on going all the way back to the mid 20th century, saying that, in the 12th of Rabiul Awwal in South Asia was most commonly called Bara Wafat, meaning 12 days of passing. But the term itself, as you know, reflected the fact that early Muslim biographers and historians most universally agreed upon 12th being the exact date of the Prophet's death. It was observed with solemnity, quiet prayers, like biographical lectures, and the distribution of food. So there were no grand street parties or elaborate multicolored lights or replica models of the Kaaba or Green Dome on the streets. So again, that was a fact because they were commemorating his death, not they were not celebrating it. So, there's a difference. When you know that this is the date that your Prophet passed away, you're not going to be having joyous festivities. So this delusion that people have suddenly come into where they're like, it's his birthday. Like, seriously, where did you even get that from? Well, we know where they got it from, but the fact that, as I said, even our parents did not celebrate it in Pakistan, and I'm talking about Pakistan, even though Pakistan argues that it was always it was a national holiday, but not for festivities and joyous occasions or parties or lighting up your houses and mosques. No, this was, again, a quiet, meditative period. So the transition to public celebration, one would argue, began in 1930s when it was still the subcontinent, heavily driven by the Anjumane Khudamuddin and the emerging Barelvi school of thought. So again, you see, now the Sunnis are constantly, trying to argue that, those Sunnis who are in favor of celebrating, they are arguing, but I thought you and the Barelvis had a problem anyway. So why are you suddenly, so accepting of something that the Barelvi school of thought began? And again, as we know, as I've said many times, it was basically to counter the massive, highly visible public processions of other religious communities like the Hindu festivals, and to assert a distinct Muslim identity. In the British India, Sunni leaders began organizing public processions like, Julus. So the Sunnis and the Barelvis, they were like, you have these elaborate festivities, well, we can make up ours too, which again is especially the very, very definition of innovation, of bid'at. But again, as I said, it was still not something that people considered, a festival to be celebrated the way it is. And as I kept on saying, this was a political BS that was engineered to distract the people of Pakistan. And you can literally, officially, on the record, just see it. Because if you look at the 1970s and the 1980s, the state patronage and the festive explosion, the celebration transformed into this modern spectacle seen today during the regimes of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and General Zia-ul-Haq in Pakistan, So under Zia's state-sponsored Islamization policy, the government took full ownership of the festival, and state television, PTV, and radio began broadcasting round the clock Naat competitions, and the state began giving official protocols and security to the Milad processions. So, why it became so commercialized today over the last 3 decades? What began as a state backed holiday turned into this massive competitive cultural phenomenon due to sectarian identity branding and commercialization. And we've already somehow touched upon the sectarian identity branding, and let's move on to commercialization, because just like the Western holidays, it became a lucrative business. So entire markets in cities like Lahore, Karachi, and Rawalpindi now specialize exclusively in Milad merchandise, lights, banners, and sound rentals. So while the change did not happen overnight, the transition from the somber Bara Wafat of your grandfather's era, of our parents' era, to the modern highly festive Eid al-Milad al-Nabi was deliberately engineered by religious and political mobilization between the 1940s and the 1980s. So again, pray tell, especially what the army has been doing even now, provoking your sentiments, your emotions with 14th August, with Imran Khan's release, and then using his release as a direct diversion while they passed the 27th Amendment. I mean, throughout all these 79 years, but especially from Ziaul Haq's time onwards, but in fact, not even from Ziaul Haq's time, but I mean, right from the start, the way the army, every single time they came, they distracted the masses, and that is why you people are such, spectators, because, tamashai kaum aime nahi na banti. You guys are spectators because you always want a spectacle. You always want to have something, something dramatic, something spectacular to divert you. So you yourselves are like that sheep, you just want diversions right, left, and center. And the fact that this generation does not even know, I mean, it's amazing, because this is something that I thought any and every Muslim would know. And to see that in Pakistan people do not even know this, that 12th Rabiul Awwal is the date that the Prophet, peace be upon him, died. You don't even know the day that you are celebrating. That is the worst thing ever. I mean, seriously, how pathetic is this? How pathetic is this, that you do not... This is the height of regression. No wonder there is no moral compass, no social, no cultural, no, I mean, there is... Everything is so tilted. Everything is so regressed. Well, I mean, this whole civilization is regressed, but I mean, seriously? What's wrong with you people? I mean, the millennials, they're already peed off as it is. And now Gen Z is even more peed off. And we're peed off because we always thought that our parents, made the biggest mistake of, allowing our country to come to this point. But then when I look around me and I'm thinking that, okay, regardless of generation, you're all screwed. You're all just screwed. I mean, for our parents' generation is obviously screwed up, but hello? Okay, Gen Z, do you even have a clue what 12th Rabiul Awwal is? Millennials, do you have a clue? How is it that your parents have never made that clear to you? Because I'm telling you, your parents knew. My parents knew. Now, don't tell me that you needed to go through a general knowledge book or an encyclopedia in order to know this. This is actual general knowledge. This is something every Muslim knows. I'm amazed at the amount of stuff that people in Pakistan do not know while calling themselves Muslims. Seriously, I'm just amazed. And then to argue, the worst part is that they either don't care, as a me and a couple of other women, we were discussing that, you know, even if we sit them down and tell these kids that, you know, this is not a day to celebrate, this is the day of the Prophet, peace be upon him's passing. You're supposed to spend this day in quiet reminiscence or meditation, if anything, not going around, you know, the streets and ringing doorbells and asking for charity money. You know, this country is a Jamandru fakir as it is, this whole nation. You know, that you are of, you know, generational beggars is all I can say, because that's all Pakistanis now seem to do. They just want to beg. Any and every occasion, you know, it's a good occasion to ask for money. Like this is, Pakistanis have come to this point. Okay, let's face it. That now even Bara Rabiul Awwal, 12th Rabiul Awwal is supposed to be a day where, you know, this too is now an added day where, oh, it's another occasion for us to ring doorbells and ask for money. Like, are you serious? And they literally lie. I mean, in our case, most of the kids that come, they come from God knows where, and they lie that, oh, the mosque, the people of the mosque has sent us. And we know that because our mosques over here, they don't indulge in such things, they don't do such things. So, you know, they're lying right off the bat, because you're like, okay, so where exactly have you come from? Because we know that the mosques in our area, they do not practice these things. They do not indulge in these things. So, but there are so many mosques, actually, a good number of mosques that have, and the Maulvis have taught the kids that, oh, it's 12th Rabiul Awwal, go and start ringing doorbells and ask for money, for charity in the name of the Prophet. Are you serious? The Prophet never gave money to beggars. And the Prophet explicitly warned us never to give money to anybody who begs, because it's better to help that person stand on his own 2 feet, so that he in turn can help another person stand on his own 2 feet. This form of charity that is being practiced in Pakistan is actually not at all encouraged in Islam, where you just give money blindly and, you know, that's it. No. In Islam, the whole point of charity is that you should make the other person capable enough that next time he can give charity to another person. This kind of charity that people seem to give and think that, oh, you know, Pakistan is number one in charity, the country that comes the highest in the list of the largest number of people giving charity. Yeah, and still look at the amount of poor people that you have in your country. How is your charity helping with that? You know, as long as you've got a corrupt government and a corrupt army and a corrupt institution and a corrupt bureaucracy, your charity isn't going to do much, now is it? Charity begins at home. Try fixing your actual flaws, you know. Try understanding that your government has been duping you into all forms of bid'at and shirk, and especially this government. Notice how since this government has come, and obviously you can see that it's all the same military rule book that keep the people diverted, you know. Every single bid'at in the book, they have turned it into public festivities. Every single shirk that you can think of, Maryam Nawaz turned it into public festivities. Like, what's wrong with you people? Well, you're not Muslims, we know that. But you know what? At least we think we are Muslims. You know you're not Muslims, but we actually think we're Muslims. So, you know, try to be a little more cautious. Why are you constantly pushing shirk and bid'at towards the already uneducated, illiterate, regressed minds? Obviously, what you hope to gain from it is diversion, distraction. Keep them busy, you know. Amazing. Well, I'm glad to say that the students are, you know, the students in the universities are waking up, because to be honest, I was beginning to have a problem with Gen Z as well in Pakistan. I'm like, yeah, the whole world's Gen Z is awake. The only one that is forever asleep is obviously Pakistan. It doesn't matter which generation you are from. you're forever asleep, you're zombied out. But the way the students of Sarhad University in Islamabad protested today, the way they grabbed a power abusing brigadier, who some people say he was a colonel, some people say he was a brigadier. First of all, try to figure out what the hell he was. In any case, he was an army in uniform, an active serving army, and he barged in to abuse his power because his wife apparently had an argument with the head of the Department of Allied Sciences. This is the first time I've heard of allied sciences, to be honest. I've heard of applied sciences, but I've never heard of allied sciences. But okay, you never know. So, point being, she was in the HR department. He was the head of department of his own subject. They both had a problem with each other, and then they both issued complaints against each other, or forwarded complaints against each other. And then I think the students came forward saying that no, she's actually lying, and she is literally accusing him of something that he never did or said, and she retaliated against the students. And then her husband came. She apparently probably called her husband, and he came barging in the university, and he started slapping students around, and he started swearing at them. And the students were so pissed off that they grabbed him by the collar, and then they beat him up. They beat him up so much that at the end of the day, then he pulled out his gun, and he tried to literally shoot the student, one of them. There was a female who was constantly with him. I don't know why nobody asked this question as to who that female is, because she didn't seem to be with the students per se. She was with him throughout, but she was stopping him from being violent, and she was the one who tried to stop him from shooting the other student, and then she grabbed at him 2 to 3 times trying to calm him down. So she's definitely somebody he knows. Don't tell me she was his wife. Nobody seemed to have pointed that out, so I don't know. But anyway, according to them, the wife was still inside the building, but this girl was with him throughout. I don't know. But anyway, and when the police came, then the police blatantly refused to arrest him. Yeah, imagine. But the police guaranteed. First, the police claimed that they didn't even know who or what he was, and then they guaranteed that whoever or whatever he was, they can guarantee that he will be punished. Amazing. And that pissed off the students even more, and they're like, you mofo, you're literally refusing to handcuff a person who was caught in broad daylight shooting in the air after trying to shoot at the student. And they're like, this is your army, this is your government, this is your order, and this is your, and they began, the girls, the female students, the males, they just ranted and raved in front of the media as well, and they were pissed off. Kudos to you people, but you know what? You need to, again, as I said, well, I'm hoping this will definitely become a movement, but knowing Pakistan, everything comes in waves. And I'm especially pissed off at Suhail Afridi, to be honest, because I think that he is an a-hole, okay? Just straight out there, he's an a-hole. Like, you're still thinking about 27th September, are you serious? Imran Khan just sent you a message saying, pick up your speed. Step on the freaking pedal. And what are you doing? You're thinking of stepping on the pedal on the 27th of September. Like, with friends like you, who needs enemies? This is me signing out. Khuda Hafiz.